Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. Structurally, Steins Gate's premiere is broken into two halves that speak to their focus within its first episode. The first half is the thriller section, focused on getting the audience invested in the plot with all of its foreshadowing, looming questions, and bizarre occurrences. The second half is the lab members section, introducing the viewer to three of the four primary characters, their relationships, and hinting at circumstances. It's not that the thriller half doesn't help to introduce the characters, nor that the lab member half doesn't forward the plot, but if we were to break down the major takeaways from each, they'd fall under the categories as I've labeled them. And conveniently, they're separated by hacking to the gate and follow a tension curve that has two peaks at the end of each section. Strong cliffhangers like these are useful, not only helping to slowly descend in what serves to be a low-tension second half of the episode, but also to really punctuate that half with its ending moment. At the end of the day, though, structure is just the bones on the story itself, and to really get into what makes the thriller section work, we're gonna have to flesh it out. One of the major elements in establishing a tense sequence is in how you establish tone. And in that regard, Steins Gate's lighting and sound design do a fantastic job of setting the stage. We carry over the bleached white lighting while outside from the opening minute, and add to it tons of crowd noise, music playing to produce a very much alive, if not chaotic and slightly disorienting picture of Akihabara. That is all immediately thrown aside once our characters enter the radio building, what with it being extremely quiet and the darker corridors. It's an impressive contrast on its own, and it's best represented in this shot, as the light fulfills this gradient effect across the screen where the whites are overexposed on the left and the blacks are overexposed on the right, leaving the visible space compressed, even if the shots themselves weren't framed to do so. And that's the major impact of these decisions for the sequence, an eerie, claustrophobic feeling that just can't be shaken except for moments inside the lecture room and once we've left the radio building. Given how much stuff that happens in this half is seemingly random, and indeed the gruesome moment that this sequence is building up to, that feeling of uncertainty and light anxiousness that's produced by the plot itself is reflected in its visual and audio composition. The sequence also has very clever visual direction to inform us intuitively about our characters, primarily Okabe as we follow him through the sequence. After the loud noise from the roof, we see this shot. The entire left side is pitch black, so we're instantly going to look to the right. And as he crosses this visual barrier, it's practically a threshold moment. And once he's gone, we're immediately brought back to Mayuri not only because of her movement, but because the light is there. Okabe's inherent curiosity is something not shared by Mayuri, and it's also something that literally separates them as he runs off, leaving her behind. Despite that difference in separation though, Okabe does genuinely care for her as shown in the following scene with the Upa, and with Mayuri innocently but purposefully busting through the Hyoin Hyoma name with just a smile that forces one onto his face as well, which speaks to their closeness. The time travel lecture visually shows Okabe's separation from the average attendee of the conference, already a small self-selecting group, with him sitting in the far back 2 rows away from anyone else. And it also suggests that the professor isn't exactly a big name with tons of empty seats. But if there's one thing I love about this sequence, it's the focus on the eyes. Nakabachi's blue eyes on the right versus Okabe's yellow on the left. And specifically how much anger you can tell are coming from the profs even without the verbal context. And Steins Gate cues us in for a shift when we're shown Kurisu, whose eyes are closed. Okabe tries to hold as much distance as possible. When she cuts to the left, he moves to the right, which is a great shot inherently because of the contrasting movement, and it also leads to this great look at her blue eyes as she turns to face him. Okabe continuously tries to build space despite Kurisu's continued forward pushes for answers, as with her approaching him to grab the phone. At least until the final shot, which uses the full frame to allow Okabe to lean in for his confident final line before sprinting away and hiding. It's a great duality of persona and reality that's on display in that exchange that is almost the perfect encapsulation of Okabe's character early on and gets reinforced in the second half, which we'll cover next time. But all in all, I love how the visual language of this section tells us about the characters to empower the verbal exchanges or to entirely replace them. Sprinkled throughout the thriller section are the seemingly random occurrences, which the show manages to make multi-purpose not only on their faces, but also in how it paces them out to make them relevant but also irrelevant. The 3 moments I'm referring to are the rooftop shake, Kurisu stating that they've spoken before, and the video mail. It's important to state that all of these events don't actually need proper explanations even to function on their face purposes. Introducing two important elements for the end of the section and breaking the flow / adding to the creepy tone. With the exception of the Kurisu instance, these moments have very little time to be pondered, as we rush into talking with Mayuri in both instances, which rightfully makes them feel like small plot points. In Kurisu's case, with the video mail that follows it, in that moment, it feels like such a bigger deal with the zoom and static overload that Kurisu's kind of put aside until the moment we're about to get to. The pacing of these three foreshadowing events is designed to introduce them, leave them as hanging questions, and move along ASAP, since the true contexts and explanations are so far down the line that dwelling on them does the story no favors. Rather, the dual purpose of introducing characters and plot elements on the face of the story is sufficient, given how it assists in helping to make the audience feel even a little bit more unsure of what's happening. If Okabe doesn't get it, how could we be expected to? But at the heart of this sequence is what all of this information and work was building up to. That silence now being filled by a disconcerting track that comes in after a loud scream, the deliberate echoing footsteps, the shaky first-person shots to highlight the tension in the dark hallway. Followed by the vision of the dead Kurisu intercut with her profile from earlier, the buzzing of the phone, the intensity of the red blood that bleeds into other frames, all coming together to highlight the dread. And the slow rotation into darkness before cutting to the white sky outside is a great contrast. The fact that the audio is still actually building, specifically the violins and the choir, doesn't allow the audience to feel like that was the climactic moment, and nothing about being outside is particularly settling either, with the overwhelming number of people and sounds at play. The audience is almost trying to settle itself, just like Okabe is, but as that track comes to an end, as far as powerful imagery goes, Okabe standing alone is pretty indicative of the journey he's just unwittingly launched himself on. The sound is what sells this for me, though. The echoing footsteps, the lone pinging notes, and the shimmering sound effects. It doesn't feel real, that this should be impossible and that this couldn't possibly be what's actually happening. Fitting, given that there's so much beyond Okabe and the viewer's comprehension at this point in the story. The pan up from the phone not only regrounds the audience, but fortifies the connection between the message and this occurrence, and the empty streets that Okabe runs through back to the radio building could not be further from the opening section's treatment of sound and crowds. The slow reintroduction of the world is conveyed through the visuals, first with Mayuri, then with other people who appear frozen, before they begin moving again as the shots continue onward as though the world is rebooting. There's a nice addition in the English version which processes Okabe and Mayuri's voices to give them a slight distortion to add to the sense of modification. But across both versions, the sound design of the sequence has changed. What used to be filled with crowd noise and fanfare or emergency response noises, now there's just a soft rumbling as though there's a plane taking off in the distance. But that rumbling is indicative of something else entirely, as a double slow motion movement cues up the final shot in the sequence, as we tilt and rotate up to see a similar looking machine whose rumbling grows even louder now, embedded in the roof of the radio building, leading perfectly to the first instance of hacking to the gate. The thriller introduction in the first half of Steins Gate is carried primarily through its clever pacing and strong establishment of tone, but what personally impresses me continuously is how the small character moments go so far to make them interesting and memorable, even before we've truly met any of them. We'll have to save that, at least in the case of these two, for the next video in Operation Yggdrasil when we tackle the second half of the episode, specifically taking a look at the writing to determine what makes this moment one of my favorites. But until then, L. Sci. Congru.